Thunder cracked overhead as 17-year-old Jake Ramsey plunged through the dense woods, soaked to the bone and breathless, his flashlight beam jittering wildly across the underbrush. "She was here," he shouted over the wind, tripping over a root. "I saw her. She ran into the trees." His father, Gregory, stumbled behind him, panting, flashlight in hand. "Jake, wait, that's not—" Jake whirled around, face pale, wild-eyed. "You said she was gone, that she was dead. But I just saw Ellie. That was her, I swear it." Lightning illuminated the forest, and for a split second, the outline of a small figure appeared ahead. She turned her head, just enough for Jake to glimpse the unmistakable dimpled cheek he'd never forgotten. Then, she was gone again. The morning they arrived at Crater Lake Cabins, the sun shimmered through the trees like a promise. 11-year-old Ellie Ramsey pressed her face to the car window, watching pines zip past as their old SUV wound up the forest road. "This doesn't look like a vacation," she mumbled. Her father, Gregory, glanced back in the rearview mirror with a practiced smile. "That's because you haven't seen the lake yet." Jake, only 7, kicked his sneakers against the seat, humming to himself, unaware of the tension in the front seats. Ellie could feel it. She always felt it. The same dull pressure that had settled over them since their mother died in the crash. A year had passed, and yet silence still filled the spaces where laughter used to live. The cabin was smaller than she expected, wooden, slanted slightly to one side, with a porch that creaked under her feet. Dust floated through the air inside like memories refusing to settle. Ellie turned in the living room slowly, taking in the faded couches and the old fireplace. Everything smelled like cedar and wet earth. Jake bolted toward the back room. "Dibs on the top bunk." "Let him have it," Gregory muttered, dropping the cooler on the kitchen counter. "We'll only be here 3 days." "Why here?" Ellie asked. She crossed her arms. "Why not a hotel, or Disneyland, like you promised?" He opened the fridge, empty. "Because I thought we could use some quiet. Nature helps people heal." "You mean it helps you drink in peace?" she shot back. Gregory's jaw tensed, but he didn't respond. He pulled a beer from the cooler and popped the tab. Ellie turned away. That night, the woods came alive. Owls hooted softly from high branches, leaves rustled. Something, a fox maybe, darted through the brush. The cabin lights flickered once as a storm built somewhere in the distance. Inside, Jake had fallen asleep with his stuffed turtle under one arm. Ellie stood by the window, peering out at the darkness. The lake glinted in the moonlight beyond the trees. Beautiful, still, but something about it made her uneasy. Her father was on the porch, smoking. She could hear him muttering into his phone, low, angry tones. She caught a name: Marjorie. The next morning, Ellie woke to find the front door unlocked. Her father was still asleep on the couch. Beer bottles scattered on the floor like confetti from a private celebration. She nudged Jake awake. "You want to go down to the lake?" He rubbed his eyes. "Dad said not without him. He's out cold. We'll be back before he even knows." They tiptoed through the trees until they reached the water. The air was still cool, the lake a sheet of glass. Jake skipped stones while Ellie sat on the dock, chewing her thumbnail. That's when she saw him. A man, across the lake, just standing there at the edge of the trees, watching. He didn't move, didn't wave. Ellie stared back. When she looked again, he was gone. That night, she didn't sleep. She told Gregory about the man, but he waved her off. Probably another hiker. People come out here to camp all the time. But he was staring at us. "You're letting your imagination run wild, like your mother used to." It was the first time he'd mentioned their mom in weeks. Ellie went silent. Jake had another dream that night. He mumbled something in his sleep. "Don't go, Ellie. Don't go outside." The next morning, she was gone. Jake remembered the screaming first. Gregory's voice, ragged, roaring her name into the woods. "Ellie! Ellie!" Then the slam of the front door, the pounding of boots on the floorboards, the frantic search, under beds, in closets, behind the cabin. Jake sat frozen on the bottom bunk, clutching his turtle, staring at his father's pale face. "She's gone," Gregory kept saying. "She's gone." The police came that afternoon. State troopers, rangers, K9 units, flashlights and clipboards and walkie-talkies. The woods were filled with strangers calling her name. A female officer knelt in front of Jake. "Did you see where your sister went?" Jake shook his head. "She tucked me in. I went to sleep." No broken windows, no signs of forced entry, no footprints. It was as if she'd vanished into thin air. But Jake remembered one thing. He'd woken briefly in the middle of the night. A sound, maybe footsteps. The door creaked. Someone whispered his name, soft and quick. He thought it had been Ellie, or maybe a dream. On the third day of the search, they found a shoe by the lake, muddy, half buried. It was Ellie's. Gregory collapsed when he saw it. Jake watched his father weep into his hands. But something about it felt off, performed, like he needed people to see him crying. After a week, the search was called off. There was a press conference. Reporters swarmed the cabin. "She must have wandered into the forest," Gregory said, blinking at the cameras. "It was an accident." Jake held his father's hand, but even then, barely old enough to understand what death meant, he knew something wasn't right. He had questions no one would answer. Why didn't Ellie scream? Why hadn't the dogs found a trail? And why, when he asked about the name Marjorie, did Gregory go so quiet? That summer ended in a blur. No funeral, no body, just a closed case and a broken family. Jake was bounced between relatives for a while, then back to Gregory, who quit drinking for a while, then started again. Reporters lost interest. People stopped asking, but Jake never forgot. Not the bracelet Ellie wore, not the whisper in the dark, not the man by the lake, and certainly not the name Marjorie, echoing in the back of his mind like a code he was too young to crack. 10 years later, that code was breaking, and the truth, whatever it was coming back into the light. One fragment at a time, 10 years later. Jake Ramsey couldn't sleep anymore. At night, his dreams tangled him in trees and whispers and broken memories. In the deepest parts of sleep, he heard his sister calling for him. Sometimes from the lake, sometimes from behind a door that wouldn't open, sometimes from a forest he didn't remember entering. He would always wake with his sheets tangled, heart pounding, sweat sticking to his back. The same question would sit on his chest like a weight. What if she was never gone? That spring, as Jake turned 17, the dreams became sharper, too sharp to dismiss. His therapist called them trauma echoes, buried memories clawing their way to the surface, but they didn't feel like echoes. They felt like warnings. One dream kept repeating. Ellie in a hoodie, running through the trees, her hand reaching back, grabbing his. "Come on," she whispered, urgency in her voice. "We have to go, before he finds out." Jake would always wake before he saw who he was. On a rainy Saturday, Jake climbed into the attic of their old house, the one his father had insisted on keeping after everything fell apart. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, closure, maybe, or evidence that he wasn't losing his mind. The attic was thick with dust, boxes crammed into every corner like forgotten chapters. One was labeled Family, Summer 14. His stomach tightened. Inside, he found a stack of photographs. Most were of road trips and birthdays. His mum smiling with her whole face. Gregory, younger, less tired. Ellie, confident and curious, always standing slightly apart from the group like she knew something they didn't. Then he found it. A single photo out of place. Ellie standing beside a woman Jake didn't recognize. The woman wore dark sunglasses and had a hand placed awkwardly on Ellie's shoulder. In the background was a cabin, definitely not the one they had stayed in. This one had green shutters and a sign nailed to the porch, Cabin 6B. Jake turned the photo over. Written in smudged pen, July 16th, with M. The date was off by 3 days, 3 days before Ellie vanished. Jake's breath caught. He hadn't remembered another woman being on the trip. No one had ever mentioned her in the police reports or in therapy. But there she was. M. Marjorie? The name struck him like cold wind. He carried the photo downstairs like it was made of glass and spread it on the kitchen table, staring at it under the flickering overhead light. His dad had always insisted it was just the 3 of them on that trip. No one else. No visitors. No strangers. But Jake knew that wasn't true now. And if that had been a lie, what else had his father lied about? He waited until his dad was asleep on the couch, TV on, an empty beer bottle on the floor, and slipped back into the living room. Gregory had always been good at lying. Even after Ellie vanished, he kept a calm face. Tears when needed, interviews rehearsed. Jake used to believe him. But now, the cracks were showing. He gently pulled open a cabinet he wasn't supposed to touch, the one with his mother's things. There, in a manila folder, was a stack of old papers. Divorce proceedings, bankruptcy filings, and tucked into the back, a child custody agreement, one that had never been signed. Jake's eyes scanned the lines. His mom had planned to fight for sole custody before she died. There were annotations from a lawyer, notes about Gregory's instability, about inappropriate caregivers. One note stood out. Subject, Marjorie McLean, past CPS involvement in Illinois. Not suitable. Jake froze. She had been part of it. His father had lied to the courts, hidden her name, brought her along anyway. Ellie had tried to tell someone. Jake remembered now how she wouldn't talk to Gregory that last night, how she cried on the top bunk, whispering things to herself like she was afraid someone would hear. He hadn't understood then. But he did now. Jake printed the photo and pinned it above his bed. Every morning he woke and stared at that woman's hand on his sister's shoulder. He started researching Marjorie McLean. Nothing came up at first, but digging deeper, he found an article from 2008, an arrest record in Chicago for child endangerment. Then another from 2012, under a different spelling, Marjorie. Each record more disturbing than the last. She had gone by many names. She had been flagged by multiple states. Somehow, she always slipped through the cracks. Jake sat back in his chair, heart pounding. The woman who had been with them wasn't some harmless babysitter or family friend. She had a history, and she had been with his sister 3 days before she disappeared. Jake started talking to the trees again. Not out loud, just when he walked through the woods behind his house, or when he drove past state parks. He would whisper in his head, "Ellie, I remember now." He didn't know if she'd hear. He didn't even know if she was still alive. But the dreams wouldn't let him rest. In them, she was always close, just beyond reach, her hand slipping away, her voice fading. One night, after weeks of silence, he had another dream. This time, Ellie was sitting in the green shuttered cabin from the photo, alone, hugging her knees. She looked up at him and said, "Why didn't you come sooner?" Jake woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. That was the moment he made the decision. He was going back to Crater Lake, not to heal, not to find peace, but to find his sister. Back to Crater Lake. Jake hadn't told his father the whole truth. When he proposed a getaway back to Crater Lake cabins, Gregory had blinked in surprise, then narrowed his eyes. "You want to go back there?" Jake shrugged with careful casualness. "I don't know. Thought it might help. Maybe I need to stop running from it." That last line seemed to land exactly where Jake needed it to. Gregory nodded, slowly. "Closure," he muttered. "Maybe you're right." Jake smiled, but his heart beat just a little too fast, because what he wanted wasn't closure. He wanted the truth. They left on a Thursday, the same route they'd taken 10 years earlier, up winding forest roads and long-forgotten back highways that cut through forgotten towns. The radio didn't work, and Gregory hummed tunelessly under his breath, occasionally glancing at Jake with unreadable eyes. "Crazy, huh?" Gregory said after an hour of silence. "Feels like a lifetime ago." Jake didn't reply. He just stared out the window at the trees as they thickened, crowding the road like they wanted to swallow the car whole. By the time they arrived, the sun had dipped behind the ridge. Crater Lake's surface glistened with orange light. The cabins stood like tired sentinels, older and more weathered than Jake remembered. They were assigned Cabin 4. Jake's stomach twisted. "Not the same one, right?" "No, we were in 2B back then." Jake nodded, but he'd already checked. Cabin 4 overlooked the same trail that led down to the lake. It was close enough to feel everything all over again. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. The room smelled of pine and old water. The wooden walls creaked with every gust of wind. Gregory was already snoring in the next room, unaware or pretending to be. Jake sat on the edge of his bed, the photograph of Ellie and Marjorie folded in his pocket. He pulled it out, stared at it under the yellow light of a table lamp. The porch in the background, the green shutters, the faint shadow of a number carved into the support beam behind Ellie's shoulder, 6B. Jake had searched the cabin registry earlier that day when the front desk attendant left it unattended. Cabin 6B wasn't part of the public rentals anymore. The ledger had a red X marked through it. Jake had circled it anyway. At dawn, he slipped out. The lake was eerily calm. Fog clung low to the surface, winding between the trees like smoke. He followed the gravel path, heart pounding, eyes darting toward every sound. Then he found it. Cabin 6B. It was half hidden behind overgrowth, its path choked by weeds and moss. The porch sagged in the middle, and the green shutters now hung crooked on their hinges. But it was unmistakable. He stepped onto the porch slowly, the boards groaning beneath his weight. One of the steps creaked with a familiar tone, one he remembered from a childhood he barely understood. He tested the door, locked, but the side window wasn't. He pushed it open and climbed inside. Dust layered everything, counters, chairs, floorboards. The air was stale. Cobwebs stretched across the ceiling like faded memories, but the shape of the space, it matched his dream exactly. He reached the back room. There, in the corner, sat a child's chair. Tiny, red, faded now with time. He walked over and picked it up. Then he saw it, scratched faintly into the wood of the chair's back. ER. His breath caught. Ellie Ramsey. She had been here. Jake didn't mention the cabin to Gregory that night. Instead, he watched his father drink by the fire pit, silhouetted by the flames. Something about the way Gregory stared into the coals unsettled him. Detached, distracted. Jake tried to break the silence. You said it was just the three of us that trip, that there was no one else. Gregory looked up slowly. That's right. Jake's heart thumped in his chest. You sure? Gregory's eyes lingered on him. Something flickered behind them. Fear, maybe, or calculation. I would remember, he said, voice low. Of course I'm sure. Jake nodded and looked back toward the woods. And that's when he saw her. A figure in the trees, just at the edge of the firelight. A girl. She was watching. She was real. He stood up, but by the time he reached the trail, she was gone, vanished into the shadows like smoke in wind. The next morning, Jake returned to cabin 6B with a backpack and a flashlight. He pried open a loose board in the floor where the dust seemed disturbed. Inside, a rusted tin lunchbox, the kind kids carried in the 80s. Inside it, a bracelet. Beads strung on a pink cord, some cracked, some faded, but unmistakably familiar. It was Ellie's, the one she never took off. Jake remembered the fight they had over it the day before she vanished. He'd tried to borrow it as a joke. She'd screamed at him to give it back. It had felt over the top at the time. Now it felt like a warning. He stared at the bracelet in his palm, and a memory rose fast and hard. Ellie whispering through his bunk bed bars that last night. If something happens, don't believe what he says. Jake's throat tightened. He didn't tell Gregory about the bracelet. Instead, that night, he asked him another question. Do you remember a woman named Marjorie? Gregory froze mid-drink. What? Marjorie, Jake said again, voice steady. She was with us. I found her name in Mom's old court files. Gregory's eyes hardened. That was years ago. You said we were alone. We were. Then why was she in a photo with Ellie at a cabin that's been shut down for 10 years? The glass slipped from Gregory's hand and shattered against the porch. Silence filled the space. Jake didn't flinch. Gregory stood slowly. This trip was supposed to help you, he said coldly, but maybe you're not ready. He walked inside and slammed the door. Jake stayed on the porch long after the wind picked up and the trees began to whisper. Because somewhere out there, Ellie was watching, and he was getting closer. Jake sat awake in the cabin's living room, a blanket draped around his shoulders and the bracelet resting in his palm like a small, pulsing secret. Rain battered the windows. Thunder rolled over the lake, low and distant. He couldn't shake the image of Gregory's face when he mentioned Marjorie, how his father had gone stiff, like he'd been slapped. That wasn't the reaction of someone remembering a distant acquaintance. That was the reaction of someone caught. The storm outside deepened as Jake pulled his notebook from his backpack and began sketching a memory map, a web of names, places, questions. At the center, Ellie. What had she meant that night, whispering to him through the darkness? If something happens, don't believe what he says. Why had she been afraid? The next morning, Jake woke with a jolt. He had dozed off in the chair. The bracelet was still clutched in his hand. He moved quietly, not wanting to wake Gregory, and stepped out into the misty air. Crater Lake was still, the water reflecting the grey sky like glass. For a moment, it was peaceful. Then he heard it. A footstep behind him. He turned fast, heart pounding, but no one was there, or so he thought. In the soft mud by the path, just near the edge of the trees, he saw something. A footprint. Small, narrow. Too small for Gregory, and it hadn't been there yesterday. Jake crouched beside it, brushed away a few leaves, and found another. A trail, faint but real, leading into the woods. He followed. The forest felt older the deeper he went, the trees pressing close, the light dimming with every step. He walked slowly, alert to every sound, the birds, the wind, the occasional crack of a branch underfoot. Then he saw it. The stone wall. Old, half-collapsed, covered in moss. It was a boundary of some kind, stretching along the ridge. Jake stepped over it and into a small clearing. At the far side stood a structure, wooden, low-roofed, covered in vines, a shed. He pushed open the door. Inside it smelled of mold and rust. Shelves lined the walls. Empty crates, a broken lantern. But one item stood out. A child's backpack, blue, sun-faded, the zipper broken. Jake knelt and opened it. Inside, a sketch pad. Half the pages torn, but one remained. A drawing, a cabin, green shutters, a girl standing at the window, and beneath it, in faint pencil, "He told me not to speak." Jake's vision swam for a moment. Then another memory broke through, one he hadn't seen in years. He was 7, lying awake in his bunk bed, clutching his stuffed turtle. The cabin was silent, except for the faint creak of the porch. Then the sound of voices, low, angry. Ellie's and someone else's. Not Gregory, a woman. "You said she'd be safe," Ellie cried. "Shut up," the woman hissed. "I want to go home." A door slammed, heavy footsteps, Ellie crying softly on the other side of the wall. And then, silence. The next morning, she was gone. Back in the present, Jake sat in the shed, his hands trembling. That memory had been locked away, buried under layers of time and denial. But now it surfaced with terrifying clarity. Gregory hadn't told the police the full story. Jake was sure of it now. He pocketed the sketch and stood. He needed more. Proof. Something to connect Marjorie to Ellie's disappearance. That night, Gregory cooked dinner, canned chili heated over the gas stove, and acted like nothing had happened. Like they were just two people on a camping trip, not a father and son orbiting a black hole of buried truths. Jake decided to push again. "You ever think about what really happened to her?" he asked. Gregory didn't look up. Every day. "You think she wandered into the woods, alone, with no shoes?" "I don't know," Gregory said stiffly. "She was upset. We all were." "You're lying." The words came out colder than Jake intended. Gregory looked at him, startled. "Excuse me." "You're lying," Jake said again. "You've always lied. You told them we were alone, but we weren't." Gregory's expression changed, not to anger, but to fear. For a split second, his composure cracked. "You don't remember what you think you do," he said softly. Jake leaned forward. "She was scared of you." Gregory's eyes flashed. "No. She was scared of her." Silence. Jake's breath caught. "Her who?" Gregory stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. "This conversation is over." He stormed into his room and slammed the door. Jake stared at the empty chair across from him, pulse hammering in his ears. Her. The pronoun hung there like a noose. Gregory knew something, more than he'd ever admitted, and he was unraveling. Later that night, Jake took the drawing from his backpack and studied it again. The image haunted him. The cabin, the window, the figure in the trees. He turned the page. There, faintly etched into the next sheet, was a word, barely visible unless the light hit it right. Basement. Jake's breath hitched. There had been a basement. He remembered now. He and Ellie had played a game that second night, running down into the basement of cabin 6B to look for monsters. But it had been locked. They never got in. Or at least, he didn't. The next morning, Jake returned to cabin 6B with a crowbar and a flashlight. The basement door was behind the kitchen. He hadn't noticed it on his first visit. It was covered by a shelf that had been dragged in front of it. He pried it aside and forced the door open. The stairs creaked beneath him. The air turned colder, damper, the smell of mildew thicker. At the bottom, a single room. Bare. Cement floor, no windows. And on the far wall, scratched into the plaster, over and over again, like a child's desperate chant. I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home. Jake's stomach twisted. This was no hiding place. It was a prison. Ellie had been here. She hadn't vanished. She had been taken. And someone, possibly more than one person, had helped cover it up. Jake turned off his flashlight and stood in the dark, letting the truth settle like dust in the air. The past wasn't behind him. It was below him, and he was standing on it. The basement changed everything. Jake didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every creak of the cabin sounding like footsteps, every shadow like a whisper from the past. His flashlight sat on the nightstand, ready, the bracelet still wound around his wrist like a shackle. He couldn't bear to take it off. He kept hearing her voice in his head. Don't believe what he says. When dawn broke, pale and cold, Jake was already dressed. He made coffee, forcing down the bitter taste, and sat at the table across from Gregory, who emerged from his room rubbing his eyes. Gregory said nothing for several minutes, only poured himself a mug and stared out the window. Jake broke the silence. Why didn't you ever tell me there was a basement in cabin 6B? Gregory's mug froze halfway to his lips. Jake didn't wait for a reply. I found it, he said. The door was hidden behind a shelf. Someone tried to keep it out of sight. Gregory didn't move. There are basements in a lot of the old cabins, he said finally. Most of them were sealed off when they stopped using them. Mold, rats, structural damage. Jake studied him. This one wasn't sealed, just blocked, and someone had been in there. Gregory met his eyes. What exactly are you accusing me of? Jake didn't blink. Of knowing more than you've ever said. Of lying. Again. Gregory stood slowly, his mug shaking slightly in his hand. You think I wanted this? You think I enjoyed what happened to Ellie? That I haven't relived that night in my head every day for 10 years? Jake rose, matching his father's energy. You've relived your version of it. The one where she wandered off. But that's not what happened, is it? Gregory's mouth opened, but no words came. Jake leaned in, his voice sharp. She was taken. She left us clues. The basement, the drawing, the bracelet. She didn't disappear. She was hidden. You hid her. Gregory looked like he'd been slapped. Then, unexpectedly, he slumped into a chair and covered his face. Jake waited. For the first time, his father didn't argue, didn't deflect, just whispered, I thought I was doing the right thing. Jake didn't move. The room felt impossibly still. The wind outside rattled the windows. Gregory looked up. His face was pale, empty, like he'd aged 10 years in a single breath. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he said. It was only supposed to be for a few weeks. Just to keep her safe. Jake stared. Safe from what? Gregory looked away. From your mother's family, he muttered. They were going to take you both from me. I was going to lose everything. Ellie knew. She was old enough to understand what was happening. Jake's jaw tightened. So you what? Faked her disappearance? Hid her somewhere so you could win a custody fight? I didn't fake anything, Gregory snapped. I asked for help. From someone who said she could keep Ellie safe. Someone your mother trusted once. Marjorie. Gregory closed his eyes. Yes. Jake took a step back, nausea rising. You handed your daughter over to a woman with a record of child endangerment? I didn't know that then. She had CPS reports, criminal charges. I didn't know, Gregory shouted, standing again. All I knew was that I was out of options. I was drowning in debt. The courts were circling. Marjorie said she could take Ellie for a while, just until things calmed down. She made it sound easy. Jake's voice was low, cold. So you let her take Ellie. And then what? Gregory's hands trembled. I was supposed to meet her a week later, at the ranger station, but she never showed. I waited for hours. I called every number she gave me. Nothing. And then you called the police, Jake said bitterly, pretended she'd wandered off into the woods. Gregory nodded slowly. What else was I supposed to do? Tell them I handed my daughter off to a woman who vanished with her. They would have taken you from me too. They should have. The words tore out of Jake's throat. Gregory flinched. Silence returned. Jake took several steps back, heart racing. You let me grow up thinking she was dead, he said, voice barely a whisper. You watched me mourn her. You watched me blame myself, and you said nothing. I thought maybe... Gregory swallowed hard. Maybe she'd come back. Maybe she'd show up one day. I told myself I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself. Jake stormed out of the cabin into the cold morning air. He didn't know where he was going, just that he needed to move. The trees swallowed him. He kept walking until the cabin was out of sight, until the lake disappeared behind a curtain of fog. He finally stopped when he reached the old stone wall and collapsed to the ground, breathing hard, fists clenched in the dirt. He sat like that for a long time. Eventually, the sound of footsteps reached him. He looked up, half expecting Gregory. But it wasn't. A girl stood on the other side of the wall. She wore a hoodie too big for her frame. Her hair was tangled, her face pale. Ellie, older, but unmistakable. Jake's heart stopped. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at him with wide, glassy eyes. He stood slowly. Ellie, she blinked once, then turned and walked into the woods. Jake gave chase, heart slamming against his ribs, dodging trees, leaping roots. Ellie, wait! She disappeared behind a bend in the trail. When Jake rounded the corner, she was gone. But something was there. A notebook, half buried in leaves. He picked it up with shaking hands. Inside sketches, cabin 6B, the basement, a woman's face, cold and angular. Marjorie. And on the last page, he told me you'd forget me. Jake sat down on the trail, the book clutched to his chest, tears streaming silently down his face. She was alive. She was still out here. And now he was going to find her. Jake didn't tell Gregory he'd seen her. He returned to the cabin at dusk, the notebook hidden under his jacket, his face numb from cold and shock. Gregory was sitting by the fire, staring into the flames like they held the answers he'd refused to give for 10 years. Jake walked past him without a word. Inside, he laid the notebook on the bed and opened it again. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. Sketches, notes, symbols, the scrawled writing of someone who had been alone too long. The sketches became darker the deeper he went. A girl with hollow eyes curled in the corner of a room, bars over windows, a padlock on a door. The woman's face appeared again and again. Angular jaw, thin lips, eyes like cracks in stone, and in several drawings a figure stood in the trees. Sometimes far in the background, sometimes much closer. The stranger in the trees. Jake's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a journal, it was a record. Ellie had documented her time in captivity, her escape, her survival. She had left breadcrumbs, and she had left them for him. That night, Jake sat outside by the fire after Gregory had gone to bed. The woods were alive with sound, wind, distant owls, rustling branches. He felt eyes on him. Again. He stood and turned slowly. There she was, half hidden behind a tree just inside the forest's edge. She looked the same as earlier, older, thinner, but unmistakably Ellie. Jake's heart climbed into his throat. He stepped forward, careful not to startle her. Ellie, he said softly, it's me, it's Jake. She didn't move, but she didn't run either. That was progress. He took another step. I know what happened. I read your drawings. I found the basement. Still, she watched him in silence. Jake's eyes stung. "I didn't forget you," he whispered. "I never forgot you." A gust of wind stirred the trees. Ellie blinked. Then she turned and disappeared into the woods. Jake didn't chase her this time. Instead, he began leaving things. A granola bar, a bottle of water, a small flashlight, folded notes sealed in Ziploc bags. He left them near the edge of the trees where she'd appeared. Then he waited. Each morning, the contents were gone, sometimes replaced with something else. A pine cone, a smooth stone, a wildflower tucked into a piece of moss. A quiet language was forming between them, primitive, careful, but real. On the fifth morning, Jake found a note, scrawled in pencil on torn notebook paper. "You shouldn't be here," he lied. He read the sentence over and over. His hands trembled. He turned the paper over. There was more. "They're still watching. He's not the only one." Jake's world tilted again. For 10 years, he'd assumed this story had only two players, Ellie and Gregory. But now, there was someone else. They. How many people had been involved? And why had Ellie never gone to the police? Why stay hidden in the woods? Unless she couldn't trust anyone. Jake began digging deeper into Marjorie McLean. Back in town, at the dusty county records office, he requested archived files on property owners near Crater Lake. He found what he was looking for under an alias. Marjorie Lee, a property purchased just 6 miles from the lake, nestled between state forest land and abandoned hunting grounds. No address, just coordinates. Jake drove there alone. The forest grew wilder as he neared the location. The road turned to gravel, then dirt, then nothing at all. He hiked the last mile through thick brush and wet moss. Every few steps, he paused to listen. His breath, the rustling trees, the crunch of branches underfoot. Then he saw it. A collapsed shack, overgrown with vines, roof caved in, boards scattered like bones. He stepped inside, flashlight slicing through the dark. It smelled of rot and old fabric. The walls were covered in claw marks, not from animals, from hands. Scratched words covered the inside of the door. "Don't trust her. Keep quiet. Sleep with one eye open." Jake backed out slowly, chills racing across his skin. Ellie had been here. Maybe others too. Back at the cabin, Jake confronted Gregory again. Did anyone else know? Gregory, now a shell of his former self, stared at the wall. Know what? About Ellie, about Marjorie, about what you did. Gregory didn't speak, but the silence gave him away. Jake pressed harder. You weren't smart enough to pull this off alone. Who helped you? Gregory looked at him, defeated. I didn't have a choice, he whispered. Marjorie said she had connections, that she knew people who placed kids. She said Ellie would be looked after, that she'd come back changed, but whole. Jake's blood ran cold. Placed? Gregory nodded. She used that word, like it was a transaction. Jake staggered back, disgusted. You sold her? No, Gregory said quickly. Not for money, I swear. But I was desperate. She said it was temporary. She said, you gave her away. The truth settled like a stone between them. Gregory broke into sobs. Jake left him there. That night, Jake found another note waiting near the edge of the woods. I saw you go to the shack. Don't go back. It's not safe anymore. Someone else is here now. Jake didn't sleep. Someone else? A third player in this nightmare? The drawings had hinted at it. A shadow, a man in the trees, the stranger. Not Gregory, not Marjorie, someone who watched. Jake sat with his notebook open, mapping everything. Each location, each lie, each whispered clue. The forest wasn't just a hiding place. It was a network, and Ellie was still caught in it. But not for much longer. Jake had never imagined himself breaking into someone's house. But that was exactly what he did the next morning. The town's library didn't carry much, but one volunteer librarian was helpful and just curious enough not to ask too many questions. Jake had casually asked if she remembered a woman named Marjorie McLean. Marjorie, the woman said, frowning. She used to come in years ago. Strange woman, not quite right. Lived off the old service road, house with the blue door. Jake leaned in. Is anyone living there now? The woman hesitated. Place has been abandoned for years. People say it's haunted. The kids dare each other to walk up to it. Jake's heart thudded. He thanked her, checked out an old topographic map of the region, and drove straight out of town. The house stood just past a crumbling fence, down a dirt road half swallowed by trees. It was smaller than he expected. One story, sagging porch, cracked windows. The blue door was faded now, the paint chipping like peeling skin. He parked a short distance away, then approached on foot. No cars, no signs of recent life, but something in the air buzzed with a quiet tension like the woods were holding their breath. Jake tried the door. Locked. He circled the house until he found a window pried open just enough to squeeze through. Inside, the house smelled of mildew and spoiled food. The kitchen was frozen in time, plates still in the drying rack, an open book on the counter. The new child discipline. Jake flipped through it. Notes scribbled in the margins, words underlined harshly, silence, obedience, reset. He moved into the hallway. The walls were papered with newspaper clippings, child disappearances from the late 90s through early 2010s. Some marked with red X's, others circled. At the center of the wall, a photo. A girl. Ellie. Jake's stomach dropped. The image was printed from an old inkjet printer. Grainy. Probably from a school newsletter or family social media page. Pinned beside it were notes. Too smart, watches everything, not compliant. Below it, another name. Candidate rejected. Transfer failed. Jake turned away, bile rising in his throat. He found the basement door behind a curtain. It was unlocked. The stairs creaked under his weight as he descended into the dark. The basement wasn't large, but it was filled with shelves, not of tools but of files. Folders, photos, recordings. Jake's hands shook as he opened the first folder. Inside, intake forms. Notes about children, ages, names, psychological profiles, all with labels: acquired, reconditioned, rehomed. He pulled another. This one had Marjorie's name on it, along with several others. A ring of names connected by initials and coded contact info, like an underground system. Then he saw the file marked ER. He opened it. Inside, a photo of Ellie at age 11. A medical chart, notes on behavior, assessment scores. At the bottom of the sheet, subject attempted to flee, unreceptive to treatment, removed from placement site, awaiting reassignment. Jake's mouth went dry. Another page, refused to speak, uncontrollable in group setting, isolated in holding cabin 6B. He stared at the words for a long time. Ellie had been part of something larger. She hadn't just been hidden. She'd been processed. Jake took photos of everything with his phone, heart hammering in his chest. Suddenly, he heard a creak from above. Someone was in the house. He killed his flashlight and crouched in the dark, holding his breath. Heavy footsteps crossed the floorboards upstairs. Not Gregory. Too light, too slow. Jake crept to the corner of the basement and peered up through the cracks in the floorboards. He saw boots, black, muddy, standing perfectly still in the kitchen. Then they moved. Toward the hallway, toward the curtain. Jake backed up quickly, pressing himself against the wall. The basement door creaked open, light spilled down the stairs. A silhouette appeared at the top, thin, tall, with something clutched in one hand. Jake didn't wait. He darted behind the furnace just as the person descended one slow step. Then another, then another. The stranger reached the bottom, paused, turned toward the shelves, and began flipping through folders. Jake held his breath. The man pulled one, pocketed it, and turned. Then he froze. His head snapped toward Jake's hiding place. Jake bolted. Out from behind the furnace, he sprinted across the basement, up the stairs, knocking the figure back with his shoulder. He didn't stop to look, just ran. Through the kitchen, through the living room, out the window. Into the woods. He didn't stop running until he couldn't hear the footsteps behind him anymore. His lungs burned. His legs shook. But he clutched the folder he'd taken tightly to his chest. Inside it, a list, a network, and coordinates. Back at the cabin, Jake locked every door and closed every window. Gregory asked nothing. Jake said nothing. He sat in his room, the folder laid out across the bed. There were at least 6 locations, code names for each. Cabin 6B was listed, with an X beside it, closed. But 3 others were still active. One was only 20 miles away. Jake circled it. If Ellie was still watching, still running, maybe she wasn't just hiding. Maybe she was trying to stop them. Late that night, he found another note waiting near the woods. "I saw him. He followed you. Don't go alone next time," and scribbled beneath it, smaller, almost too faint to read. "There are more of them now." The list in the folder haunted Jake. 6 code-named locations scattered across rural Oregon and Northern California. Cabin 6B was marked closed, subject removed. Another site, Outpost K3, was labeled active. Field status unknown. And then there was the final page, a single line in block letters. Known escapees, status unconfirmed. ER, last seen near perimeter. SC, disconnected. Location unknown. JM, extracted. Data compromised. 3 names, 3 kids. Jake recognized the initials. ER was Ellie. That much was certain. But SC and JM? Who were they? Jake knew what he had to do. He returned to town the next morning, found a quiet corner of the library, and began cross-referencing the initials with missing children reports. It took hours, poring through archived databases, scrolling through grainy photos and timelines. Then he found her. SC. Sarah Collingwood. Reported missing from Eugene, Oregon in 2011. Age 10. No trace ever found. Parents divorced. Last seen near a community hiking trail, also near one of the coordinates from the folder. Jake's chest tightened. He checked JM next. Jenna Mace, disappeared in 2013. Age 11. Foster system. History of instability, according to the file. A vague police report noted a possible runaway, but the circumstances were nearly identical to Ellie's, vanished from a camping trip with a temporary guardian. Jake scrolled further. Jenna had resurfaced, 2 years later. In Idaho, she'd been picked up in a supermarket parking lot, barefoot and malnourished, refusing to speak. The official story? She'd been lost in the system. But there were no follow-up interviews, no media coverage, just silence. Then Jake found a blog. It hadn't been updated in 5 years. After the vanishings, by someone calling herself Mira K. In a post from 2020, Mira wrote, "They think it was just 1 or 2 cases, but there were more. Some of us got away. We don't talk, but we watch. We remember everything. I know about Cabin 6B. I know about the basement. If you're reading this, you're looking too. Find us." Mira K. SC. Jake stared at the screen, stunned. Sarah Collingwood was alive. She was Mira. The blog had a contact email. Jake's fingers hovered over the keys before he finally typed a message. Subject, Ellie Ramsey. "I think she was one of you. I found the cabin. I found the files. I found you. Please. I need to talk to you. Jake." He didn't expect an answer, but 30 minutes later he got one. From protectthenames@protonmail.com. Subject, Ellie Ramsey. "You shouldn't have gone to the shack. He follows anyone who opens that basement. If you have the list, we need to talk, in person. No phones. Meet me where she disappeared. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. Come alone." Matard. Jake's heart thundered in his chest. It was real, all of it. He packed his bag, slipped the folder and the notebook inside, and told Gregory he needed to clear his head. Gregory barely acknowledged him. The man was unraveling, muttering to himself, drinking more. After Jake's confrontations, the weight of his secrets had started to crush him. Jake didn't feel sorry for him anymore. He left before sunset. The lake was quiet at dusk, the sky bleeding into bruised purple as Jake waited near the trail where Ellie vanished a decade earlier. The trees loomed around him, and every shifting branch set his nerves on edge. Then he saw her. A woman. Late teens or early 20s, hoodie pulled low, eyes scanning the tree line. Mira. Sarah. She approached carefully, gaze sharp and tired. "You're Jake," she said. He nodded. "You're Mira." She gave a faint smile. Haven't used that name in a while. Jake handed her the folder. Mira flipped through it quickly, then paused at a page with the escapee names. This confirms it, she whispered. Ellie was with us. Jake's throat tightened. Where? Do you know where she is? Mira looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time. She never left these woods. They sat at the water's edge, the folder between them, the moon rising behind the trees. There were at least 3 cabins, Mira said, but cabin 6B was the worst. That's where they took the ones who wouldn't cooperate, the ones who fought back. Like Ellie, Jake murmured. Mira nodded. She never stopped fighting, even after the others gave up. Jake's voice cracked. She's alive. I've seen her. She's watching. I know. Mira's eyes softened. She's protecting you now, just like she protected us back then. Jake blinked. You mean she helped you escape? Mira hesitated, then nodded. They came for us in the middle of the night. Took Jenna first. I panicked. I was 12. I ran into the woods, and I never would have made it out. But Ellie, she tackled one of them, told me to run, said not to stop until I found a road. Mira looked away. I never saw her again, until last year. Jake leaned forward. She found you? She left me a note. No name, just a drawing. But I knew it was her. Jake's hands trembled. She's watching, he said. She left me the bracelet, the drawings, a notebook. She knows I'm here. She's trying to end it, Mira said. That's why you're back. She needed you to come back. Why me? Because you're the only person left she trusts. A twig snapped behind them. Both Jake and Mira turned fast, but there was nothing. Not a bird, not a breeze. Jake stood, blood thumping. She's here. Mira stood beside him. No, he is. Jake froze. Who? Mira pointed toward the trees, the one they called the shepherd, the man who moved the kids. Marjorie answered to him. Jake's heart pounded. He remembered the boots in the basement, the way the man didn't chase, just watched. They said he never speaks, Mira whispered, but he always knows when you're close. The forest around them grew colder, the trees darker. Jake looked at Mira. What now? She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. Another location, another cabin. This is the last place they used, deep in the forest. It was never on any map, but Ellie knew about it. Jake stared at it. If Ellie had been leaving clues for years, this was the last one. The end of the trail. They left at dawn. Jake and Mira packed light, flashlights, water, protein bars, and the last of the notes Ellie had left behind. The map Mira handed him had no trail, no markers, just hand-drawn landmarks and a set of instructions. Go when the mist is low, follow the ravine until the birch tree split in 2, then west toward the scarred rock. It's beneath the ridge, you'll know it when you see it. Jake knew Ellie had drawn it, and she had meant for him to follow it. They hiked for nearly 2 hours, leaving behind the lake, the last signs of civilization and the safety of the known world. The deeper they walked into the forest, the quieter it became. No birdsong, no wind, just the soft crunch of boots on dead leaves. Do you think she's already there? Jake asked. Mira didn't look back. If she is, she won't show herself until she knows it's safe. Jake wasn't sure any of this was safe. They found the ravine first, steep, winding, dotted with moss-covered stones. Then the birch tree, split cleanly in 2 like it had been struck by lightning. Jake's pulse picked up. They turned west. The air felt colder now. The trees grew closer together. The forest swallowed light and breath alike. Then, after a final climb, they saw it. A large rock face, scarred with a jagged burn line, blackened and twisted. Beneath it, just where the map said it would be, was the cabin. It wasn't like 6B or the shack near the lake. This one was newer, sturdier, almost like a research station. Industrial locks on the doors, small barred windows, a steel chimney. Jake stepped forward, instinctively reaching for Mira's arm. Wait, he said. Something felt off. The place was too quiet, wrong, like the forest itself wanted nothing to do with what had happened there. Mira moved ahead, circling the cabin carefully. No footprints, she said. No tire marks. Jake approached the front door. It was partially open. Inside, the air was stale, but not abandoned. Still lived in, still dangerous. The interior was dim, lit only by narrow beams of light slipping through the high windows. The furniture was sparse, metal chairs, a desk with a single filing cabinet, and a small cot in the corner. Maps were tacked to the wall, marked with coordinates. Jake recognized some of them. "This is where they coordinated it all," Mira murmured. "Drop sites, transfer points. I've seen this layout before. It was on a wall at the first cabin." Jake opened the filing cabinet. Empty. Then he spotted a loose floorboard near the cot. He knelt, pried it up. Inside, a weathered box, a sealed envelope, and a set of photos. He pulled them out carefully. Children, different faces, different years. Some looked barely 10, others older, glassy-eyed, thin, frightened. Jake turned them over. Each had a code written in pencil. And one phrase, "reconditioned." He gripped the edge of the box, his jaw clenched. This wasn't just about hiding Ellie anymore. This was about all of them. "Jake," Mira whispered sharply, "you need to see this." He followed her to the back of the cabin, where a trapdoor was hidden beneath a rug. Together, they opened it. A ladder descended into darkness. Jake climbed down first, flashlight cutting through the stale air. The space was narrow, stone walls, thick insulation, a single long corridor with locked metal doors on each side. Cells. Mira turned pale. This is where they kept them. The first door was ajar. Inside, a metal bed frame bolted to the floor. Chains, a camera mounted in the corner. The walls had been scratched by fingernails, lines of desperate etchings counting days. Jake's stomach turned. The next door was locked, so was the third, but the fourth swung open with a groan, and inside was a message, scrawled in dark ink on the wall. "I told you I'd find you, Jake. I'm sorry I couldn't wait, but you're almost there now. E." Jake felt like he couldn't breathe. "She was here," he whispered. Mira nodded, her voice shaking. "She led us here on purpose. This was her trail's end." Or almost. Suddenly, a sound echoed through the cabin above them. A creak. Not the wind. A footstep. They exchanged a glance. Mira drew a small knife from her boot. "Get ready?" Jake pocketed the letter and moved to the ladder. A shadow crossed the floor above. A figure stood at the trapdoor. Jake looked up. Boots. Dark pants. And then eyes. Cold, watchful. The same figure from the Marjorie house. From the trees. The stranger. He didn't speak, just stared. Jake's voice was barely a whisper. "He followed us." Mira raised her weapon. "Back up the ladder, now!" Jake obeyed, keeping low, trying not to make a sound. When he reached the top, the stranger was gone. Vanished into the woods. But something had been left behind. A photo, taped to the inside of the cabin door. Jake peeled it off. Ellie, standing in this very cabin, years younger, staring dead into the camera. Her eyes weren't afraid. They were angry. They searched the rest of the building, found the logbook, Marjorie's handwriting unmistakable, ER transfer incomplete, subject compromised other units, aggression persistent, mental deterioration predicted, relocated to fallback zone, observation only. Do not re-engage. A location was scribbled beside it. Jake's breath caught. He recognized it, the old Ranger lookout tower. It had been closed for over a decade. They left the cabin as the sun began to set. Back into the woods, hearts pounding, heads spinning. Jake gripped the letter Ellie had written him, folded tightly in his fist. "She didn't want us to stop here," he said. "This wasn't the end." "No," Mira agreed. "She's waiting at the lookout." Jake nodded once. "Then let's finish this." The Ranger Tower stood like a ghost above the trees, old splintered wood. A rusting ladder that reached into the clouds. The sun had dipped below the ridge now, and the forest glowed in that strange twilight, not light, not dark. Suspended. Jake stared up at it, heart hammering. Mira scanned the base of the tower with her flashlight. No footprints, nothing fresh. Jake gripped the ladder, looked over his shoulder. "You sure about this?" Mira nodded. "I'll watch below. If anything moves, I'll call up." Jake nodded back, then began to climb. Each rung creaked under his weight, but held. 40 feet, 50. When he reached the top, he saw the door. It was slightly open. A breeze pushed it wide. Jake stepped inside. The cabin atop the tower was small. Spartan, a desk, a chair, a cot, long unused. Dust blanketed everything. But someone had been here, recently. On the desk was a single candle, unlit. Beside it, a drawing. His and Ellie's initials. Inside, a crooked heart. Jake's throat tightened. Then a voice behind him said, "I told you I'd wait." He turned. There she was. Ellie. Older, thinner, stronger. Her hair was tied back. Her face marked with faint scars, but her eyes were exactly the same. "Ellie?" Jake stepped forward, breath catching. She watched him, frozen. For a moment, it felt like she might vanish again, like this was another mirage, another dream. But she didn't. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Jake pulled her close. It was real. It was finally real. They sat together on the edge of the platform, legs dangling, silence stretching between them. The forest below swayed like a dark sea. Ellie spoke first. "They told me you forgot." Jake shook his head. "Never. I searched, even when I didn't know I was searching." She gave a faint smile. "Good, I needed you to." He looked at her. "Ellie, what happened?" She exhaled slowly, eyes on the horizon. "They took me because Dad let them, but it was Marjorie who changed everything. She was just the middle. There were others, rich, powerful, sick. They didn't want kids like me. They wanted kids who could be remade, controlled, broken." Jake swallowed hard. "But you fought them." "I tried. They moved me from place to place. Cabin 6B, the underground cell, the shack near the ridge. But I wouldn't break. That made me a problem." "What did they do?" Ellie looked at him. "They left me in the woods, said if I survived, it was proof I wasn't worth fixing." Jake clenched his fists. "And you did survive. For years, at first I hid, then I started watching, learning, following the others they brought through." Jake's eyes widened. "You saw them bring more kids." Ellie nodded. "Some made it, some didn't, but I knew I had to stop it, so I started leaving clues, notes, the bracelet. I needed someone on the outside to see the truth." "Me?" "You." Jake took her hand. "There are others, Mira, Sarah. She helped me get here. There are people who survived, people who remember." Ellie looked up sharply. "You found Mira?" "She found me." Something flickered in Ellie's eyes, hope, relief. "She made it." "She did. She never forgot you either." Ellie smiled, real and raw and sad. Jake reached into his bag and pulled out the folder. "We have everything. The photos, the names, the maps, this whole thing. We can bring it down." Ellie shook her head. "It's not enough. They'll say it's fabricated, that we're unstable, just like they did to Mira, to Jenna, even to you." "Then what do we do?" "We show them something they can't ignore." Jake and Ellie climbed down the tower together. Mira was waiting, eyes wide when she saw them. No words, just a long, silent embrace. Ellie whispered something in her ear. Mira nodded, tears brimming. Then Ellie looked at Jake. "Come on, there's one more place we have to go." They led Jake to a clearing deeper in the woods. A buried entrance, hidden beneath rocks and brush. Inside, a network of tunnels, long abandoned but still intact. Rooms filled with old records, videotapes, hard drives, dossiers. Jake stared in awe. "This is where they kept their real files," Ellie said, "the stuff they never meant to be found." Together, they packed as much evidence as they could into bags and crates. Then Ellie pulled out a flare and handed it to Jake. "Light it." Jake hesitated. "Are you sure?" Ellie's voice was steady. "They can't use this place again, not for anyone." Jake lit the flare. Together they walked out into the night, watching the entrance behind them as flames burst skyward, smoke curling into the trees. A funeral pyre for the past. In the weeks that followed, Jake and Mira shared the files anonymously with investigative journalists, survivor networks, and human rights groups. The story exploded. The operation, once considered urban legend, was exposed as very real. A few arrests were made, others vanished. The woods remained silent, but now people looked. The truth had been revealed. Jake returned to the lake one last time. Ellie stood at the edge, staring out across the still water. She turned when she heard his footsteps. "You going to stay out here forever?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, just long enough to breathe." Jake smiled. "I kept the bracelet," he said. "I know," Ellie replied. "You were the only one who would." They stood in silence a moment longer, then she said, "Let's go home."